anyone who has never been here before, the purpose of the Republican Roundtable has been to provide platforms for discussion at a time where, conservative thought, as we've seen, escalated significantly this past week, can be censored. Conversations with real people and real places here in our community, I think, are important now as ever before. And so the purpose of this talk tonight, this is going to be, I promise to never subject you guys to the same sort of talk and meeting in the future. I'm going to be the single speaker tonight, and I'm going to speak at length, trying to break down exactly how we got to where we are today and what can be done going forward. For anyone that has known me, for a while now, and I'm very excited that we have several people here that I've known for quite a while. For the last 10 years, I've been studying, the issue of liberty versus power. Studying it from a historical lens, from a theoretical lens, from an economic lens, from a cultural lens. I think that America truly is a unique experiment in human history, and I think that there are very real forces today that put it at risk. But I also think, rather, while there is a lot of reasons for negativity and concern, at the same time, I think that we are at a very unique period of American history, that there's a lot of reasons for optimism. And one of the things that I hope to emphasize today is that while we should be realistic about the dangers that we face in the near future, there is a lot of reason for hope. And so if it seems like I'm going a little bit long and building up to where we got here, there was reasons for that. Because I think understanding where the true levers of power that have been exploited to silence the true American remnant, that is vital to understanding how we advance going forward. So again, there's going to be a lot of things hit tonight, but hopefully you will find it worth your while at the end of it. And if not, then I'll buy you a beer afterwards. So again, this has been a terrifying week in this country. We now face the scenario where the Democrats now have control over both legislative branches of the federal government. They will soon take over the executive branch, and worst of all, we are now witnessing the mobilization of the corporate press, big tech, and various global corporate interests to weaponize their power to declare war against half the country. They will justify their actions by pointing to a small group of violent and disruptive individuals at the U.S. Capitol this past week. While the actions of these individuals should be condemned, the hypocrisy here cannot be overstated. Many of these same actors clutching pearls on CNN and big corporations actively cheered on left-wing political violence throughout this past year. Forgotten entirely, we have witnessed an attempted assassination of multiple Republican leaders in 2017 that almost claimed the life of Republican Whip Steve Scalise. The takeover and threatening, we also witnessed, I completely forgot about this, the takeover and threatening of senators by left-wing activists during the Kavanaugh hearings. They took over one of the Senate buildings, disrupting business and throwing off alarms there. And also just a few months ago, we saw peaceful Trump supporters in D.C. after the election violently beaten by activists of the left. Of course, the hypocrisy doesn't end there. The same people that are claiming now that they are the great defenders of American democracy, patting themselves on the back. The reason we are at this point, let's be clear, is that you had multiple states, largely governed by Democrats, changing election laws at the last second without the approval of their legislatures. We saw a massive increase in vote-by-mail balloting, which the New York Times and various others have acknowledged is a uniquely vulnerable form of voting. We have witnessed unorthodox ways of conducting elections, and all of these, after 4 years of various American institutions doing everything they can to undermine, subvert, and stop the agenda of the democratically elected president of the United States. All of these are breaking with political norms. All of these were examples of political escalation. And now they are shocked that Trump supporters question the legitimacy of the election given these changes. I'm sorry, there are valid questions here that cannot be overlooked, and nothing this past week changes that fact. Now, unfortunately, pointing out these inconsistencies is pointless. The bias on display by these actors does not come from ideological blinders. It is an explicit part of their agenda. What we are seeing is a long concerted effort to scrub away the remnants of America's unique ideological nation. Now, while the acceleration of the past week, again, is terrifying, nothing short of it, it is not unexpected. We were never going to make America great again by simply electing a champion into federal office. This does not do anything to diminish the significance of Donald Trump by any means. The last 4 years have not only offered a pause in America's decline, with several significant accomplishments along the way, but it has, most importantly, exposed to anyone capable of critical thought the true nature of America's enemies. Amen. Hopefully everyone in this room now recognizes that the greatest threat to our liberty is not to be found overseas, but it is residing in our capital, in our largest cities, and also in our universities. In 2017, shortly after the election of President Trump, I addressed the same group at the St. Andrews Yacht Club, and I offered a warning to my fellow Republicans. I emphasized that our victory was only going to be short-lived politically, and that we should not expect that we would be able to forge the federal government into a reliable tool for conservative ends. As I noted then, it took exactly one presidential administration for tools designed in the war on terror under Bush to be wielded against conservatives. As we near the start of a new Democratic administration, this is precisely what we face in the next 4 years. Now again, if this is all depressing and concerning, I understand, but my talk tonight is not going to scare you into submission or to convince you that the battle has been lost, just the opposite. While I believe that the next few years are going to be times that try men's souls, it is important to understand America's progressive elites have never been more vulnerable. Since the last few weeks, more than one person has come to me trying to compare Washington, D.C. to the capital of the Hunger Games. The left can only seem to make fictional comparisons with their fascination with Harry Potter and the like. So let me start tonight's talk with a relevant quote. Remember who the real enemy is. One of the consistent sayings throughout that series. Now I'm going to open up with what may be the most controversial part of my speech tonight, because it is my view that the real enemy of the American right and the American people is not Antifa, nor the explicit socialists like Bernie Sanders or even AOC. These people are not our friends, and they are motivated by ideas that, if put into power, would be utterly devastating to all of us in this room. These are simply the foot soldiers, however, wielded by the elite, unleashed while convenient, and seemingly silenced when they have served their purpose. They are not the ones in charge, as AOC is quickly learning. Bernie Sanders spent his entire decades-long career in Washington as an irrelevant nobody. While his presidential campaign brought energy, volunteers, and money into the Democratic political party he spent his entire life being independent from, none of this has given him true power within the party. Bernie Sanders sold his soul to the interest of the very corporations that he spent his life opposing. And in return, he couldn't even manage to get a cabinet position token from the Harris administration. No, the real danger comes from what I will call the globalist left, who want to leverage their influence of globalist oligarchs like Jeff Bezos. They're not the ones building model guillotines in front of one of his very fine houses. Ultimately, those on the left who do not get on board with the Harris administration will find themselves, much like Glenn Greenwald and Tulsi Gabbard, cast alongside with the deplorables of real America. The objective of the globalist left is not a socialist revolution uniting the workers of the world. Instead, it is an attempt to fundamentally realign global power into a progressive controlled hegemony. The goal is to make the world safe for democracy, with democracy in this case being purely ceremonial. It is a way to disrupt long-standing historical ties to family, religion, and culture, with an egalitarian view that we are all just truly citizens of the world. Preference for taking care of your neighbor, or those who share the same values as you, is seen as an act of violence against those who do not share such ties. Any recognition of the civic building blocks responsible for building and elevating civilization have been attacked as reactionary defenses of the racist patriarchy. It is precisely this egalitarian impulse that makes it a clearly leftist political ideology, understand, and also explains their passionate hatred for nationalist movements, regardless of their underlying political intent. The perversion of democracy here really is key. Democracy at its best has been a means for people, particularly what we might call the middle class, to organize as a way of checking corruption of the elite. And it's been a way of changing over oppressive political regimes without violence. What we're seeing right now is the perversion of this to try to instead simply allow those without unelected power have the mantle of popular legitimacy. It has been weaponized. And as the sphere of government power increases, politics has been corrupted away from the peaceful means of organizing society into means of war by other means. The more constitutional rights are eroded, the greater importance comes from holding the levers of power. Even worse still, as time goes on, The actual lovers of power have been increasingly distanced from those of the people, and into those that never see their name on the ballot. For example, congressional committee staffers, like my colleagues I used to work with, they have more powerful than most congressmen in DC. And as we've seen the last 4 years, the executive branch is full of parasitic barnacles, firmly entrenched in major positions of power, who can ignore the orders of the democratically elected president. We've also seen the judiciary hijacked by people that view themselves more as super legislators, whose outcomes are dictated by what they believe are political outcomes, rather than by the rule of law. The benefactors of what we may call this managerial state are multinational corporations whose economic interests are less America-focused and increasingly international in scale. While once upon a time it was good business to brand yourself as patriotic, the combination of growing international markets, in particular Chinese markets, where the government requires you to kneel before having access, coupled with America's own institutions degrading and undermining respect for our nation, has perversed the incentives of these corporate giants. These people are now more likely to celebrate a gay pride flag than an American flag. The result is the creation of the most perverse form of empire the world has ever seen. This is a bureaucratic behemoth inspired to enrich corporate elites at the expense of the people of the nation without even offering nationalistic pride in return. Instead, the American empire wants its own people to be ashamed of its history and actively export to the rest of the world values in conflict with the ethical and moral framework that made us great in the first place. Donald Trump's election was a punch in the face to these people. The reason they hate them so much is that these people have spent their entire lives assuming that their victory was assured. Donald Trump made them question that. But first, before we get to this, we must understand how it came about in the first place. The professional political class of operatives that have taken over this country, it really has its roots in the progressive revolution of Woodrow Wilson and FDR. None of these people had any form of democratic mandate. Woodrow Wilson won with about 40% of the vote in a three-way race. FDR actively campaigned against the big government measures of the Hoover administration. What happened is that the growth of the federal government and its agencies have created a bureaucratic class of policy professionals. And in order to staff and fund and fuel these bureaucratic agencies that view themselves as having a responsibility to centrally plan our economy, they built out a university system along the lines of the German model that became so prevalent within Europe. Again, the regimen and planning of FDR's economy shares many of the same intellectual traditions that influenced the growth of the regulatory states in various European fascist countries. The idea was, rather than a complete socialist-style nationalization, it was far easier to simply allow people to maintain control of their businesses, but rather have it be regulated by out-of-touch bureaucrats in the name of the public interest. In the last year, we have witnessed the most concentrated use of state power to eliminate small businesses and benefit large multinational corporations. If this was not intentionally meant to further the control of these easier-to-control companies, they couldn't have designed a better plan. COVID has been destructive to the working class of America. Now, during the 20th century, there are two political movements that truly understood what was going on in this country. One of them was the old right, who sought to reverse the revolution of the New Deal. And the other was actually the American socialists, who who saw these as bulwarks against their own desire for a communist revolution. Both of these had a little bit of common ground, including opposition to 20th century wars, opposition to concern over the military-industrial complex. The right's concern was what it was doing to our treasury and our people. The less concern was, hey, you're stopping our common cause. These are not good people, but they understood where power really lied. And I think this is important because if you look at the work of someone like Noam Chomsky, who spent his entire career criticizing American empire before now being a critic of Donald Trump, interesting how that happens, what they hit on was the importance of manufactured consent. What we saw was, again, this gatekeeping of information, where once before newspapers used to be explicitly partisan, providing various different viewpoints. The corporate press gave itself a monopoly on information. The New York Times now became the paper of record. The three TV networks became the sole source of information for most of America. When Walter Cronkite told you that's the way it is, you were told to believe it. This has always been a lie. It's funny, in 1876, the New York Times was single-handedly responsible for helping steal the election from Samuel Tilden to the benefit of Rutherford Hayes. They had a headline the night of, causing doubt. Because the New York Times ran this headline, it gave Ulysses S. Grant actually enough time to mobilize federal troops to take over Southern ballot boxes, and the rest is history. Rutherford Hayes ended up stealing that election. The New York Times also was one of the greatest defenders in America of the Soviet regime. Walter Durante was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who wrote 12 different articles for the New York Times in defense of Stalin, while you had mass starvation in prison camps. Over time, the Pulitzer Prize ended up being revoked, but again, these were the people that the New York Times had no problem pushing out in front of the American people. It was also the corporate press that framed the discussion of Joe McCarthy as a figure beyond reason, that portrayed Barry Goldwater as an out-of-touch extremist wanting to destroy the civilized world. And they also did this in defense of one of the most vulgar and vile human beings to ever occupy the White House, Lyndon B. Johnson. Most unfortunately as well, even conservative institutions were not beyond falling into the trappings of Washington power. The National Review in the 50s was good about defending McCarthy, but it became an instrument used to silence other right-wing intellectuals throughout the 20th century. People like Pat Buchanan, Ron Paul, Paul Godfrey, and other right-wing scholars defending American ideas were thrown out and slurred with all of the usual insults. Meanwhile, a certain type of socialist group recognized that while they could not take over America directly as long as this corporate power existed, they could do it indirectly by taking over academia. Marxists worked their ways throughout colleges throughout the country, taking on teaching positions, and beyond that, writing books that were used to educate the next generation about their country, all of it with an explicitly anti-American agenda. Now, while economic Marxism suffered a crushing setback from the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lesson that so many are apparently determined to relive, cultural Marxism has been extremely successful throughout the left. America's heritage of representing the best of Western civilization has been weaponized against the nation itself. Our founding fathers have been disgraced as simply evil slave owners. The ideas of liberty that made us unique are now representations of white supremacy. Race has become so deeply entrenched and fetishized by these alleged intellectuals that it's impossible for even a benign gesture to be seen as anything but racist. As such, cultural Marxism of these intellectuals fit perfectly into the agenda of the globalist left, trying to destroy ties to our nation and our community. Now, one of the most common characteristics in all of this is the ability of Washington to corrupt anything it touches. This includes and is perhaps essentially true of the conservative movement. For decades, conservatives have been taken advantage of by organizations that claim to fight for their values, taking their money and leaving nothing in return. This includes the Heritage Foundation. This includes various media enterprises. This includes, obviously, an untold number of politicians who fundraise against the left and then end up making concessions all along the way, giving us what we have today. The conservative movement for most of the 20th century really simply meant conserving the past victories of the left. This is precisely what made Donald Trump different and why so many of these people hate him to this day. His 2016 campaign was full of people outside of Washington. His campaign was sort of supported by tens of millions of Americans who were sick and tired of this establishment. Regrettably, his administration was undermined by the need to hire a lot of these people with past administrations. And we saw that they tried to subvert his will every step of the way. Now, just as bad as the political betrayal from conservatives in Washington has been, so has been the impact and really what has made America, the civil society of America as a whole. During the 20th century, with the growth of the welfare state in particular, we have seen a decline in the institutions such as fraternal organizations, churches, non-state funded universities, etc. Because so much power and money comes from Washington, many of these institutions end up creating their own forms of concentrated power alliances. The result is these also being corrupted. For example, just this past week, we saw the National Association of Realtors calling on its members to actively police hate speech. I think everyone in this room knows what that really means. This is while federal policies can have value for the right as purely defensive mechanisms, it can't be trusted with any meaningful positive action. Now that there is justified concern about the legitimacy of the election process entirely, the impotency of these DC-focused approaches has become only more obvious. At best, the federal government provides a charismatic stage for leaders like Matt Gaetz, who's done a great job of expressing conservative values on cable news and on the House floor. Best of all, he has the ability of taking all the blows from the corporate press and dishing it back just as hard. Our focus, however, should be less on these sort of theatrics, these battles that we can't win, and instead applying our focus, energy, and our efforts at what really matters right now, our state and local levels. Now, we are all very lucky in this room to be where we are. We are residents of the best state in the union, and our governor is perhaps the most effective conservative leader in this country. Let us not forget how close we were to this not being the case. One of the most important primaries in modern American history was a Republican primary in 2018, when Governor DeSantis was up against a career politician of the failed pre-Trump Republican Party. Adam Putnam represented the very worst of the Republican Party. He was a mediocre product of a privileged family that lacked any sort of governing principles. In Congress, he voted for spending, light bulb bans, absurd government programs like cash for clunkers, and the like. As agricultural commissioner, he tried to put small farms like a cheesy dairy up the road out of business in the benefits of large dairies. Adam Putnam spent his entire life running for governor, and he was defeated thanks to 3 tweets from Donald Trump, 20+%. Saved from a Bush-era regression, it took the talent of Ron DeSantis to then win over non-traditional Republican voters, including black mothers in Tallahassee, concerned about Gillum's hostility to school choice, including environmental activists that supported his opposition to the cronyism of Big Sugar. And he also increased Hispanic voters in a way that not only played out true in 2018, but stayed with us in 2020. Now, he inherited a state that had benefited from fairly good leadership, thanks to Republican legislators in the past. But he's also been extremely smart in the battles that he's taken on since then. He pushed back against Republicans trying to fight a stupid battle over loose-leaf medical marijuana, in spite of it being extremely popular on the ballot. He kicked out corrupt career politicians, like the failed sheriff down in Broward and the supervisor of elections in Palm Beach County. There's also a school board member down on the other side of the Panhandle. Most importantly, he has now shown that he has the ability to stand up against the media mob, and he saved the economy of the state of Florida at a time when many other Republican governors failed to do so. We've lived with a lot of freedom this year that a lot of people don't have, but just think for a second the consequences. I mean, Bay County there's no county in the state of Florida more dependent upon the service industry, the tourism industry than Bay County. Imagine what would have happened if our restaurants were closed for the past year. Imagine how many people would be out of work. We would have unemployment rates in Bay County that are depression levels. Ron DeSantis' leadership stopped that. Now, thankfully, the results of our strong Republican leadership in Florida is that we're actually trending to be more red, not less, which is in reversal to many of the other large states in the country. The problem is that this brings with it a unique danger. We have people that want to move here now. We must take seriously this threat, which is why we need to see Ron DeSantis continue with the bold leadership that he has demonstrated in 2020, coupled with support from a Republican legislature. So the question is, what can this look like? And here I have 6 action items for our Republican Florida government. First and foremost, we must get serious about the causes of left indoctrination in our country, and that is our education system. You know, Republicans for years were concerned about, understandably so, about the issues within the immigration system. The problem is that there are more left-wing voters coming out of universities than are crossing the border right now. We must treat this as the demographic issue that a lot of people treated immigration in the past. Right now, our tax dollars are going directly to fund Marxists and other leftists whose career calling is indoctrinating our sons and our daughters against our country. Every Marxist in a state-funded university is a failure of Republican leadership in the state. This is not to say that private colleges and universities should be prevented from hiring anyone they choose. But it is the perversion of our fiduciary media, of our fiduciary responsibility to actively fund individuals who are hostile to the health and liberty of our fellow citizens. At the primary level, the K through 12, we must take seriously the creeping growth of critical race theory and the distortion of American history. We should make the teaching of these things a reason for termination at any K through 12 public school. We should also mandate within our curriculums the teaching of the victims of communism, where it can be taught side by side where it belongs, with the horrors of the Holocaust. Second, we must follow through on Ron DeSantis' agenda to protect private property. Stand your ground laws have helped protect private property owners, stop criminals in the past. And it must be protected because the left tries to go at this, it seems like, every year. At a time when we are seeing George Soros and other groups target district attorneys' races to try to make the victims of crime those that are charged with crimes like Kyle Rittenhouse, standing firm on this issue is going to be vital. And we cannot allow our communities to be taken advantage of by people who do not respect our laws. Additionally, we should follow the lead of several other states in line for constitutional carry, which is a bill that Anthony Sabatini and others have filed for several years in Tallahassee. It's time for action on this. Third, we must leverage the power of our state's appeal right now to push back against the escalating corporate war on conservatives. In the same way that you saw states like California boycott other states like North Carolina and Georgia for their laws on abortion or transgender rights, Florida needs to take a stand. If you are a big business and you're trying to flee your broken blue state to benefit from conservative policy here in Florida, you don't get to then victimize conservatives that give us this policy. Any large corporation that seeks to relocate here should be pushed to provide a common platform for political actors. This is not simply big tech either. You know, we've seen banks deplatform gun manufacturers, right? We've seen various other lenders, providers of services, prevent conservatives from accessing them purely because of their political views. We cannot allow this anymore in the state of Florida. Fourth, we must get rid of our own corrupt institutions, like taxpayer-funded tourist bureaus. While the benefits of tourism marketing can be widely spread and benefit many people, the current practice of giving these quasi-government agencies largely unchecked access to bed taxes allows for cronyism and nepotism to thrive. For example, the Panama City Beach city government this past year, knowing that we were going to suffer serious budget shortfall, gave almost $1 million to a mediocre fishing show, Chasing the Sun. It does it by patting itself on the back by saying, oh, this is an award-winning show. The award it won had nothing to do with television production. It had to do with tourism marketing. You have all these bureaus that do nothing but pat themselves on the back, talking how great they are as they benefit from these bed tax dollars. Imagine what we could do if we just spent that $1 million instead of the stupid fishing show into cleaning up the sewers and fixing the infrastructure problems that tourists hurt. Our fishing would do a lot better by cleaning up the bay than it would with this stupid show. Fifth, we must do more to protect Florida's finances against the consequences of reckless fiscal policy. In 2020, the Federal Reserve created 22% of all the dollars in existence in 1 year alone. The consequences of this reckless spending and inflation are unavoidable. What we must do now is prepare for that future. We've already seen states like Texas create their own gold banks, while others have legalized the use of gold and silver as the Constitution allows. Florida can also learn from states like Wyoming and what they've done to attract cryptocurrency industries. Wyoming also allows states and municipal governments to park some of their assets in Bitcoin, which is, I think, one of the best safe haven assets out there. And we've increasingly seen insurance companies and other conservative investment funds go long on Bitcoin as a way of hedging against these inflationary pressures. And it's time for us to start looking at these sort of items. Lastly, we need to be prepared for the state to leverage every power it has to protect the residents against the federal government. This includes nullification of potential increased gun control, or cooperating with federal witch hunts designed to target average conservatives. For the past 4 years, states like California and New York have done everything in their power to undermine Chet's agenda. 4 years prior to that, Republican governors often failed to do this with the Obama administration. We can't allow for that sort of timidity anymore. Now, to some, this agenda may seem radical, but we are living in radical times. We cannot afford weak state leadership anymore. If your top priority is moving around tax dollars to benefit your district and your donor base, you're not prepared to fulfill the responsibility as elected official from a Trump county. This also means that our state officials have the responsibility to use platforms like social media to stand up for conservative values and to make the residents feel like they're being defended. I mean, one of the reasons that makes democracy a powerful force is that it allows for the people to see in the political system representatives of their interests. It allows for the growth of institutions like local parties that they see as fighting for their side. If they do not see state officials or federal officials fighting for them, they lose faith in the political process entirely. That's why what is unacceptable right now is the behavior of Jay Trumbull, our state rep. This man is 31 years old. He grew up in the age of social media. And if you look at his public Facebook page, he hasn't posted a damn thing since Thanksgiving. Everything that has gone on the last week, if you do not feel you have a responsibility as a Republican elected official to express your anger and frustration, then what good are you? Once upon a time, we had the luxury of weak men with good hearts. That time is no longer now. Now, what we need now is not simply, we don't have to simply rely upon trying to lobby Tallahassee. There's a lot of things that need to be done here at a local level. We've been told for a while now that, the two things that you're not supposed to discuss is religion and politics. In the 20th century, they tried to make politics boring. Before that, in the 19th century, the 1800s politics was throughout a community. You had people actively encouraged and engaged with the political process. You had people lobbying. Every act, throughout the year, people were engaged in politics. We're seeing kind of a return to that now. I mean, social media has allowed for that, where people share and post and talk about political ideas on a near-daily basis. What we must do is recapture. We must reject that old school politics of we're going to trust these third parties. We're going to trust these professional political consultants to represent us. No, not anymore. We must have the public here now engage with the process every step of the way. Now, one of the things we can do is that in every local government, this includes both partisan and nonpartisan places. Bay County is a plus 40 plus Trump county. When the left has plus 40 counties, they leverage every lever of power they have to promote their goals. What is now is that we must have our local governments being willing to show that they are on the side of the people and the president, Donald Trump, that we have voted for. Now, this can include purely ceremonial acts. We should be now, starting tomorrow, I'm going to be putting out a petition for the Panama City Beach government to rename Bay Parkway Donald J. Trump Parkway. If this seems superficial and frivolous, I don't believe it is. Because what we must do is that, again, now that we have so many people moving to relocate, we must show that this is a Trump county. There, in the state of Florida, there's 7 different roads named after Barack Obama in the last 4 years. We should be the first county in the state of Florida to do the same for President Trump. We must also continue to be on the guard against increased spending, against also our hiring policies. I mean, we have a state attorney, an assistant state attorney, who proudly flaunts being a Biden-Harris supporter. Now, again, I have no problem with Democrats making a career here, but when we have our tax dollars going to people who are hostile to the values of our residents, this is a problem. You don't have this. Again, the problem is this: as conservatives, we do not want our lives politicized. This is what makes us conservatives in the first place. We do not want the circus of national politics to corrupt our daily lives. The problem is we do not have those luxuries anymore, because they do. They do. And if we allow a vacuum here, then it will be filled. And we've already seen, there's a lady that goes to the Panama City Beach City Council meetings. She ran for office last year. She's been here 4 years and is now trying to remove the flag of Panama City Beach because she deems it sexist. The arrogance of these people. We cannot allow this. We also need, we need interaction not simply at our local government in more official ways. We need engagement in the school board. I've been trying for several months now to get a free market economic education material in our schools. I have not been successful yet, but I will continue to fight for that. It requires, and we also, one of the things that we need is that, again, for the longest time, there has been, I think, there's been a lot of people within Bay County that have wanted the Republican Party to be irrelevant. They have wanted politics to be boring. They've done so because it increases their power over the political system, which tends to be the one that ends up rewarding contracts to certain people. We all know this. If we want to fight back, then we need to invest our time and our energy into the institutions that exist for fighting back. We've got a great room here today. If any of you, please, if you are not already, please consider joining the Bay County Republican Party in our rec. Doing so is our lever. It is an organization here that is meant to defend conservative principles. We were already, last month, before all the craziness of the past week, we were the first rec, I believe, in the entire country to voice a resolution in support of President Trump's concerns about the election, and went out of their way to say that, look, we are going to recognize a Democratic administration as being illegitimate if these concerns are not properly addressed. We need more of this. Again, Republican organizations must defend Republican voters, or else the Republican Party will be extinct. And we cannot afford to have that. We have a two-party system. So we can't go off with a retreatism. We must instead engage and leverage the tools that we have to give ourselves as much of a fighting chance as possible. Now, before I take some questions, and I thank you all for staying here with me, I want to end with a quote from one of my favorite American conservative thinkers, Murray Rothbard. He said, "America as it exists today is two nations. One is their nation, the nation of the corrupt enemy, of their Washington, D.C., their brainwashing public school system, their bureaucracies, their media. And the other is our much larger nation, the majority, the far nobler nation that represents the older and the truer America. We are the nation that is going to win, that is going to take America back, no matter how long it takes. It would indeed be a grave sin to abandon that nation and that America short of victory." Guys, I promise you that I'll fight my entire life in defense of that American nation. I hope all of you gather with us to do the same, because again, it's the people in this room. It is not losing faith. It is not getting blackpilled. It is not tuning out. It is us standing unified that can make America great again. Thank you, guys.